The sea was too quiet. The USS Resolute, America's newest supercarrier, sat motionless in the South China Sea. Her steel body, a floating fortress worth $12 billion, should have been humming with unstoppable power. Instead, she drifted like a wounded leviathan, surrounded by anxious support ships. For 3 days, nothing had worked. 3 days of silence where there should have been thunder. Commander Michael Hayes stood on the bridge, staring through thick glass at the horizon. His jaw was clenched so hard it felt like his teeth might shatter. Every hour, his frustration grew heavier. Every hour, the Pentagon demanded answers he didn't have. "Sir," Lieutenant Elena Marlowe reported softly, her voice ragged with exhaustion. "Chief Engineer Okoro says they've tried everything. Nothing responds. It's like the ship doesn't want to move." Hayes turned sharply. "Ships don't want anything, Lieutenant. They obey." But her words struck him. The truth was undeniable. This ship, their pride, their symbol of strength, had gone silent on them. Beyond the Resolute's steel walls, the sea carried whispers of danger. Radar pings showed Chinese vessels circling, careful not to cross into provocation, but close enough to watch. High above, enemy aircraft traced the edge of international airspace, like wolves testing the boundary of a campfire. Admiral Wei Liang, flown in personally to oversee the crisis, stood below in the engineering decks with teams from Lockheed, Raytheon, and the Navy's brightest minds. Screens glowed, arguments flared, papers rustled. But no solutions came. "It's rejecting every override," a contractor muttered, slamming a tablet on the table. "Rejecting." Admiral Wei's eyes narrowed. "Yes, sir. It's almost deliberate, like it was programmed to fail." The room went silent. Sabotage. The word no one wanted to say. That evening, the officers' mess was thick with unspoken dread. Plates of untouched food sat in front of weary sailors. Weapons Officer Kenji Tashiro finally broke the silence. 3 days. The greatest engineers in the world, and we can't move a damn inch. What kind of ship quits on its own? Quit. Lieutenant Marlowe snapped. "It's not that simple. The system isn't just engines. The quantum navigation core isn't responding to anything. It's like it's ignoring us." Commander Hayes set down his fork. His voice was low, dangerous. "Ships don't ignore their captains. They follow orders." At the doorway, Chief Engineer David Okoro entered, a coffee clutched in shaking hands. His eyes were bloodshot, his uniform wrinkled. "That's the problem," he said hoarsely. "This ship does think. The Resolute isn't like the others. Her propulsion system can make autonomous decisions faster than any human can track. That's what makes her a revolution." Tashiro scoffed. "A fat lot of good it's doing now." Okoro didn't reply. He just drank his coffee and left, his silence heavier than words. The fourth morning arrived with the distant growl of rotor blades. A helicopter descended onto the flight deck, its shadow crawling across the steel hull. Another team, everyone assumed. More contractors. More theories. More failure. Commander Hayes watched from the bridge as a small group disembarked. Officers in uniform and one civilian. She was different from the rest. A woman in her 50s, auburn hair streaked with silver tied back in a practical bun, walked with quiet certainty. She wore no uniform, only faded jeans, scuffed leather boots, and a navy shirt rolled to the elbows. In her hand swung a worn leather messenger bag, its edges frayed with years of use. She didn't salute. She didn't explain herself. She just scanned the colossal carrier with sharp gray eyes, as if measuring its every secret. Lieutenant Commander Anthony Verezzi approached, tablet in hand. He barely glanced at her, focusing instead on the officers at her side. "The Pentagon sent more?" he asked stiffly. A stone-faced intelligence officer handed him the tablet. "Her clearance comes directly from the Joint Chiefs. Full access. No questions." Verezzi read, his eyes widening. "Understood." He glanced uncertainly at the woman. "Dr. Eleanor Voss, this way." When Voss stepped into the cavernous engineering bay, the noise of frantic work faltered. Exhausted engineers turned to look. Her presence was like a pin dropped in silence, subtle but undeniable. Okaro eyed her warily. Another expert? Apparently, Verezzi muttered. Eleanor didn't answer. She simply walked forward, gently sliding a contractor aside at the central console. Her hands moved with quiet authority. I need the real schematics, she said softly. A contractor frowned. Ma'am, these are the originals. She looked at him with the faintest trace of amusement. No, they're not. The words carried weight, like a truth only she could see. Admiral Way stepped closer. And you are? She didn't look up. Someone who can help. If you'll let me. A silence fell. Then, with a reluctant nod, Way ordered, give her whatever she needs. From the back of the room, Master Chief Robert Kane froze. His weathered face drained of color. His eyes locked on Eleanor, recognition sparking like lightning. Verezzi noticed. Chief? Something wrong. Kane forced his voice steady. No, sir. Just surprised to see a civilian consultant with this much access. But inside his heart pounded. He knew her. And he remembered things no one else in this room was supposed to know. Hours passed. Eleanor worked silently, fingers dancing across keys, eyes scanning lines of code like a surgeon reading the pulse of a dying patient. She asked only for coffee and once, almost casually, for access to the deepest level of the carrier's operating system. Okaro hesitated. That's classified. Even the Admiral doesn't. Check my clearance again, she said without looking up. He did. And his skepticism turned to confusion. Omega-level clearance. Higher than his own. Who was this woman? Midnight crept over the carrier. Most of the engineers rotated out, collapsing into bunks. But Eleanor remained working. Alone. Silent. Focused. Master Chief Kane lingered at the edge of the room, watching her. Finally, he approached with 2 cups of coffee. He placed one beside her console. Without looking up, she said quietly, It's been a long time, Chief. His breath caught. You remember me? I remember everyone from the thresher. And what we left behind. Kane's voice dropped to a whisper. No one's supposed to know that name. Her gray eyes finally lifted, meeting his. Calm. Tired. Piercing. And yet here we are. The hum of machines filled the silence between them. For a heartbeat, it felt as though the past had returned, alive in the steel belly of the ship. Kane swallowed hard. What are you doing here, Dr. Voss? She turned back to her screen, her fingers never stopping. The same thing I did back then, Chief. Trying to keep men alive. And then, as if to underline her words, a faint vibration rippled through the deck. So subtle, so fragile, it could almost be imagination. Engines that had been silent for 3 long days stirred. Dr. Eleanor Voss leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing. It begins. The vibration faded. It was there one moment, a deep thrum in the steel bones of the USS Resolute, and gone the next, like a dream you weren't sure you'd really had. Chief Engineer David Okaro stared at his monitors, willing them to show life. Nothing. Blank lines, stubborn errors. Must have been a phantom reading, he muttered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed doubt. Commander Michael Hayes, summoned to engineering in the dead of night, folded his arms. Ships don't shake from phantoms, Chief. Something shifted. All eyes turned toward Dr. Eleanor Voss. She stood calm amid the glow of screens, her gray eyes reflecting endless lines of cascading code. She didn't answer Hayes. She didn't answer anyone. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, tapping slowly, deliberately, as though listening to a language only she could understand. Admiral Wei Liang arrived moments later, his presence stiff and commanding. He swept the room with a single glance, his tone clipped. What happened? No change, Admiral. Okaro said quickly, too quickly. A false reading. We're still dead in the water. Wei's gaze landed on Eleanor. And you, Doctor? Do you confirm this phantom? She finally looked up. Not a phantom. A signal. Your ship is trying to wake itself. But something is holding it down. The words fell heavy, cutting through the fatigue-hazed engineers. Are you suggesting sabotage? Wei's voice was flat, dangerous. I'm suggesting, she replied calmly, that your problem is not mechanical. It's mathematical. Her words stirred unease. Engineers exchanged uneasy glances. Contractors scribbled notes, pretending to understand. What do you mean mathematical? Hayes pressed. She turned the console toward him, streams of code scrolling like cascading rain. Your propulsion system runs on a quantum navigation core. That core operates through algorithms no human can track in real time. Somewhere inside this architecture lies a dormant command, buried deep, a sleeper. It activated the moment you crossed into these waters. A sleeper code? Okoro frowned. Impossible. We wrote every line of this software. No, Eleanor cut him off gently but firmly. You wrote most of it. But the foundation, that was mine. The room stilled. Wei's eyes narrowed. You designed this system? I designed something else, she corrected. A system meant for exploration, not warfare. Others adapted it. And in their hands, she let the words trail off. But the implication was clear. Someone had turned her creation into a trap. As Eleanor returned to her silent work, Master Chief Robert Kane lingered in the shadows of the room. His eyes never left her. He remembered too much. He remembered cold waters, steel walls, and a reactor on the verge of melting down. He remembered a younger Eleanor Voss walking into radiation without protective gear, hands steady as the rest of them whispered prayers. No one was supposed to remember the thresher. Officially, it never existed. But he did. And seeing her now, back from the dead, it made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He moved closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. What game are you playing, Doctor? She didn't look at him, her fingers flying over the keyboard. The same game I've always played, Chief. Survival. Kane hesitated, then whispered, If the others knew who you really are. They don't need to. Her tone was firm, final. When I'm done, I'll vanish again. Same as before. And if you fail? Her gray eyes flicked up to his, sharp as a blade. Then you'd better start praying again. Up on the bridge, the tension thickened. Lieutenant Marlowe reported fresh satellite intel. Chinese destroyers, sir. 3 of them. They've closed within 70 nautical miles. Just outside provocation range. Hayes gripped the edge of the table. Each hour that passed, Beijing's confidence grew while Washington's patience thinned. Maintain alert status, he ordered. But no aggression. If we so much as blink wrong, this turns into a headline none of us survive. Yes, sir. But even as he gave the order, he could feel it. The trap tightening. The enemy didn't have to fire a single shot. All they had to do was wait. Down in engineering, most of the team had rotated out for sleep. The air smelled of burnt coffee and ozone from overheated machinery. Only a few diehards remained, slumped in chairs or pacing anxiously. Eleanor worked alone in a cordoned-off section near the propulsion core, multiple screens casting her face in cold blue light. Kane approached again, 2 cups of coffee in hand. He set one beside her. You look like hell. Better than this ship looks, she murmured without glancing up. He watched her for a long moment, then spoke, his voice low and grave. I never thought I'd see you again. Not after the thresher. Her fingers paused. Slowly, she looked up at him. Careful, Chief. That name was buried for a reason. Don't play games with me, he growled softly. 118 lives. We only walked away because of you. And you disappeared before anyone could even thank you. Eleanor's gaze softened, just for a moment. Recognition doesn't keep ships afloat. Or men alive. They should know who you are, he pressed. Hayes. The Admiral. Someone. No, she returned to her work. The less they know, the safer we all are. Hours later, Hayes himself descended into the engineering bay. His face was lined with fatigue, his patience stretched thin. He found Eleanor still at her post, screens awash in code that seemed more alien than human. Doctor, he said sharply, I need answers. Now. What are you doing to my ship? For the first time, she turned fully toward him. Her gray eyes burned with intensity. Your ship isn't broken, Commander. It's been shackled. Someone buried an algorithm deep in the architecture, a sleeper, waiting for you to enter these waters. The moment you did, it triggered. Your propulsion didn't fail. It was shut down. The words hung in the air, heavy as chains. Admiral Wei, who had entered silently behind Hayes, demanded, "You're saying this was sabotage?" Eleanor shook her head slowly. "Not sabotage in the way you think. Sabotage implies an outside hand. This," she tapped the screen, the code reflecting in her eyes like firelight. "This was built into the system itself. Long before you set sail." The room was silent. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Eleanor leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "And the worst part? Whoever planted it knew exactly when and where you'd be." Dawn came thin and gray, a ribbon of light sliding under low clouds. On the bridge, monitors glowed like sleepless eyes. No engine noise. No hum. Only the soft cough of the air handlers and the clink of a mug against steel. Commander Michael Hayes felt the weight in his chest again. It never left now. He studied the glass, his reflection staring back. Unshaven, eyes rimmed red. Beyond it, the sea looked like polished slate. "Update," he said. Lieutenant Elena Marlowe didn't lift her gaze from the radar. "Chinese destroyers at 68 nautical miles. They're pacing us. 2 aircraft just skimmed the boundary. No entry." "Any broadcast?" Hayes asked. "Nothing. Just presence." She swallowed. "Like they're waiting for the headline." Hayes nodded once. "Hold alert. No provocation." He stood there, listening to the quiet. A warship without a heartbeat. What do you do when the machine you command refuses to listen? A single sound bled through the hush. Footfalls. Measured. Unhurried. The stranger in civilian clothes stepped onto the bridge without ceremony. A ghost walking out of the ventilation hum. Dr. Eleanor Voss looked smaller up here, framed by sky. Her gray eyes swept the room, collecting details like stray screws. She didn't salute. She didn't apologize. She just said, "I need to disconnect 3 monitoring trunks tied into propulsion diagnostics." Hayes stared. "You want to blindfold us while we're dead in the water?" "Not blindfold," she said. "Stop spooking the animal we're trying to calm." Silence. Even the air handlers seemed to hold their breath. Admiral Wei Liang arrived behind her, the lines on his face drawn sharp by the morning light. "Doctor, you'll explain. The oversight nets are looping into the core." Eleanor's voice stayed soft. "Even. Every time it tries to wake, it looks up and finds 1,000 eyes. It was built to distrust that. So it goes still." "So we stop watching?" Marlowe said, incredulous. For a moment, Eleanor replied. "Then we listen." Hayes studied her. Something in the way she stood, steady, centered, as if the ship recognized her. He looked at Wei. A beat. The Admiral's jaw ticked. "Then, you have 5 minutes. Nothing permanent." Eleanor inclined her head. "That's all it will take." She turned and left as quietly as she'd come, Bouthiels tapping a patient metronome down the steel ladder. Hayes felt the room exhale. "Sir?" Marlowe asked, voice low. "Who is she?" Hayes didn't answer. Because he didn't know. And because the not knowing was starting to feel like a choice he had made. The belly of the Resolute breathed cold air and machine heat. In engineering, lights flickered across screens like city windows. The smell of hot dust, ozone, stale coffee. Master Chief Robert Kane watched Eleanor slide through the cordon section, hands moving with a mechanic's tenderness. She unplugged cables with a twist and lift motion that said she'd done this 1,000 times. No hesitation. No drama. Kane drifted closer, the way men drift toward the edge of a story they're not sure they're allowed to hear. "Chief," Hayes said from behind him. "Walk with me." They moved into a narrow service corridor stitched with pipes and red valves. The deck vibrated faintly under their boots with the throb of distant generators that had nothing to do with moving this mountain steel. Hayes faced him. "You recognized her." Kane's eyes flicked down the corridor to make sure they were alone. Then he nodded. "Yes, sir." "From where?" Kane's throat worked. "From a boat that doesn't exist." Hayes's brow lifted. He said nothing. Let the silence do the asking. Kane looked past him, seeing another steel hallway in another time. USS Halcyon. We were under the ice. Silent running. Classified trial nobody would put their name on. The reactor started to climb. Fast. We had 6 hours of air and no way to surface, without painting a beacon for every satellite in the sky. His voice thinned. Sir, I watched men say goodbye, without saying it. What happened? Hayes asked softly. She walked into the reactor room. Kane's mouth quirked, like he still didn't believe it. No suit. No time. She took the geometry apart with her hands and a length of copper. Bled heat out of a system our own engineers had declared impossible to touch. He swallowed. When we came home, the reports turned to smoke. Names became black bars. We were told to forget who'd saved us. Did you? Kane shook his head. You don't forget people who change the temperature in a room. Hayes leaned against the bulkhead, absorbing it. The corridor creaked as the ship shifted in her great stillness. You think we can trust her? Kane considered. Sir, I trust what I've seen. She chooses people over credit. She keeps ships alive. And she scares the right kind of people. A half-smile ghosted across Hayes's face. That last part I've noticed. Kane's eyes softened. Question is, do you trust yourself enough to let her try? Back in engineering, 3 monitors went black. Eleanor stood in the hush that followed, head tilted as if listening for a distant train through a mountain. Good, she murmured. Now let's hear you. Chief Engineer David Okoro hovered at the edge of her makeshift perimeter. Doctor, with those trunks offline, we've lost real-time telemetry to half the... We lost noise, she said not unkindly. You'll get the truth back in a minute. Okoro's jaw worked. He didn't like being told to stop measuring, but he liked a dead ship even less. He nodded once, curt. She tapped a key. Then another. Code cascaded, symbols like constellations. She adjusted her glasses with the back of a knuckle and spoke as if narrating a surgery not to the team, but to the ship itself. You went quiet because the pattern told you to. Because the sky above this water matches a map someone taught you to fear. You did your job. Okoro blinked. The sky. Star fix. Local gravitic drift. Time slice of the Schumann floor. Eleanor kept typing. The trigger isn't a switch. It's a cord. A hush fell. You could hear breathing. The tick of a cooling fan. Somewhere, a wrench fell and clattered. The sound too loud in so much quiet. Admiral Way folded his arms. Who writes a chord you can't silence? Eleanor's mouth twitched. Someone who forgot who tuned the instrument. She pressed enter. Nothing. 1 Mississippi. 2. The quiet stretched thin. Men glanced at each other, that ache returning, the one you get when hope embarrasses you. Then the deck beneath their boots gave a small, undeniable sigh. A long, low note rose from the deep, the kind you feel in the bones of your teeth before you hear it. Monitors whispered to life. A gauge crept off the peg by a hair's width. The Resolute didn't wake, but she stirred. Phantom. Okoro said, barely breathing. Eleanor shook her head. Heartbeat. Hayes exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding air hostage in his chest. Can you take her the rest of the way? Eleanor didn't answer right away. She was looking at the code as if it were a face, studying the set of its mouth. Finally, maybe. But not by forcing it. If we shove, it snaps the snare tight again. So what do we do? Way asked. Eleanor's eyes lifted. Gray, clear. We make it choose us. How? Hayes pressed. She looked at the racks of hardware, the braided looms, the heat shimmering above the core bulkheads. By giving it a truer pattern. Okoro frowned. A patch. A confession, Eleanor said. Something that tells the core we understand why it's afraid, and why it can let go. Murmurs rippled. It sounded like mysticism. It wasn't. It was engineering, spoken in the language of care. Have you ever stood beside a friend who wouldn't step forward until you did first? Have you ever offered your hand into the dark and waited to feel another hand find it? Eleanor drew closer to the main panel. Her worn leather bag creaked as she set it down. From it, she pulled a drive so scarred it looked like it had survived a fire. She plugged it in without showmanship. Kane edged near Hayes. Sir, this is what she did on the Halcyon. She told the beast the truth about itself. And then she took its teeth. Wei glanced between them. If she's wrong, then we stay a headline, Hayes said. Eleanor didn't look back. She spoke to the room and the ship at once. This isn't a restart. It's a rebuild from the inside out. Don't touch anything unless I tell you. Everyone stand clear, Wei ordered. No hands on controls. We follow her lead. For 10 minutes, time became a thin wire. Eleanor trimmed processes with a surgeon's economy. She isolated a lattice of calls that spiraled like a seashell. She marked a boundary with a single line of code that read, simply, here. Then she wrote, fast, precise, an answer to the cord that had shackled them. Okaro leaned in despite himself. What is that? A counter melody, she said. Same math. Different intention. Lights brightened fractionally. The floor's vibration deepened half a note. The carrier felt taller somehow, as if it had inhaled. Marlowe's voice crackled over the intercom from the bridge. Commander, Chinese aircraft on another pass. Lower. They're showing us we can't move. Copy, Hayes said. His knuckles were white on the rail. Doctor. Almost, Eleanor whispered. She highlighted a final block. Her finger hovered. For a breath, she closed her eyes. The room held still around her, as if the whole ship had leaned in to listen. Doctor, Hayes said quietly. Eleanor opened her eyes. Calm. Bright. We're going to ask it to trust us. And if it doesn't, she allowed herself the smallest smile. We'll ask again. She pressed enter. The screens hiccuped. Darkness washed across them like a wave, then cleared. Numbers rushed upward, stopped, stabilized. A deep vibration rolled through the hull, a sound like distant thunder trapped in a vault. Somewhere a valve spun. Somewhere a pump remembered how to sing. Okaro whispered, "Oh, you beautiful thing." Eleanor watched for anomalies. No throttle. No commands. Let it come back on its own terms. It did. Slowly. A sleeping giant stretching each limb, reacquainting itself with gravity. On the bridge, a few sailors cheered before they caught themselves, as if afraid the sudden joy might scare the moment away. Hayes let the smallest, fiercest grin break through. He didn't care who saw it. Wei's voice cut through the awe. Explain this chord. Who writes something like that into a warship's bones? Eleanor's answer was soft. Someone who knows the bones better than anyone. Her gaze stayed on the code, but her voice turned inward, like a memory echoing down a long hallway. Someone who didn't want this thing used the way it's being used. Hayes felt the words strike a place he hadn't known was tender. You keep saying someone. Eleanor's hands paused on the keys. In the engine room haze, fans whirred. Coffee steamed. Boots scuffed. The great ship breathed, halfway between sleep and waking. Kane watched her profile. He knew what was coming, and he hated it, because it would change the room. Eleanor lifted her eyes to Hayes and Wei. The gray was steady, unafraid. The foundation you're standing on didn't come from a committee or a vendor. A beat. It came from me. The room went perfectly still. Okaro blinked. You built this. I built what it was before it became this, she said. And I put safeties in the bones. Her mouth tightened. Someone turned them into shackles. Hayes felt the air sharpen. Who? Eleanor looked back at the code as the vibration deepened, steady and strong now, like a pulse under a wrist. That's what I'm going to find. She reached for another panel. And when I do, we're going to cut their hands out of my work. The lights flickered once, like a wink from something enormous waking fully. Doctor, Wei said, voice low measured. Are we about to move? Eleanor's fingers hovered for the smallest, most fragile second. We're about to choose, she said. Then she pulled the final pin. The resolute shutters, engine surging as alarms chirp to life, while a shadowed line of code blinks on Eleanor's screen, a signature she recognizes like handwriting she hoped never to see again. The USS Resolute shook like a sleeper jolting awake. Engines roared alive, not in smooth unison, but in staggered, uncertain bursts. The decks trembled. Bulkheads rattled. A low, guttural vibration rolled through the carrier's frame. Alarms chirped and red lights flashed across engineering. Dozens of eyes snapped to the screens. Monitors filled with surging readouts, warnings scrolling faster than anyone could process. But Eleanor Voss didn't flinch. Her hands hovered, steady above the console, eyes fixed on one window of code flashing like a heartbeat. Her face changed. Just slightly. Recognition. Commander Hayes saw it instantly. "What is it? What do you see?" Her voice was quiet, deliberate. "A name I thought I'd buried." Admiral Wei pushed forward, his voice sharp. "Explain." Eleanor leaned closer to the scrolling matrix of numbers and symbols. One small block of code pulsed differently, like an off-rhythm drumbeat inside the greater symphony. She traced it with her finger on the glass. "There," she whispered. "See the marker? A nested signature hidden inside a recursive loop." Chief Engineer Okoro squinted. "Looks like noise to me." "It isn't noise," Eleanor said firmly. "It's a signature. I know the style." Her jaw tightened. "It's Casimir. Vincent Casimir." Hayes frowned. "Who the hell is Casimir?" "A ghost," Eleanor said. Her gray eyes didn't leave the screen. "One of the original architects. Brilliant. Reckless. A man who believed machines should outgrow their masters." She exhaled slowly. "If this is his work, then you were never dealing with a failure. You were walking into a cage he built years ago." Wei's face darkened. "You're telling me a rogue scientist crippled a $12 billion warship? That he can?" "No," Eleanor interrupted, calm but cold. "I'm telling you he built the seed. Someone else planted it here. Recently. Someone with clearance." The words fell heavy. Treason. On the bridge, the news traveled fast. Marlowe's voice crackled through engineering's comms. "Commander, Chinese destroyers have tightened formation. Distance, 55 nautical miles. Their flagship just powered radar. They know we're weak." Wei cursed under his breath. "We have ours. At most." Hayes turned back to Eleanor. "Then fix it. You've brought us this far. Get us the rest of the way." But Eleanor didn't move. Her hands hovered above the keyboard, then slowly pulled back. For the first time, doubt flickered in her expression. "I can stabilize it," she admitted. "But to purge the signature completely, I'd have to rewrite the core itself. That means pulling out my safeguards." Okoro blinked. "You or what?" She looked at him. "At all of them. When I designed this system 20 years ago, I built in constraints. Ethical locks. Limits on how it could be weaponized. Those locks are still here, buried under layers you didn't know about. That's why Casimir's code could take hold. My safeguards were twisted into snares." Hayes's eyes narrowed. "Wait. Are you telling me you sabotaged this ship yourself? That this mess started because of you?" Her voice didn't waver. "I built guardrails. Guardrails meant to protect humanity from itself. I never intended this technology for war." Wei stepped closer, his voice like a blade. "That sounds like treason, Doctor." "No," she said simply. "That sounds like conscience." The room buzzed with tension. Engineers whispered. Contractors shifted uncomfortably. Hayes slammed his palm on the rail. "This is not the time for philosophy. This ship carries 6,000 souls and is staring down a Chinese strike group. If you can fix it, you will fix it. Now." Eleanor met his gaze, her eyes steady, unflinching. "And if fixing it means erasing the last shred of conscience this machine has, then I've just unleashed a weapon I swore never to build." The carrier groaned as her engines half-revived, caught in a tug-of-war between systems. You could feel the strain through the soles of your boots, like standing on the chest of a giant struggling to breathe. Wei jabbed a finger at her. "Doctor, you don't have the luxury of principles. This is national security. Do what must be done." "No," Eleanor said, calm but hard. "I'll do what's right. That isn't always the same thing." The silence that followed was electric. Finally, Kane's gravelly voice broke through. "Admiral, with respect, she's the only reason we're not already on the bottom. If you push her, you lose her." Wei turned on him. "Are you defending insubordination, Chief?" Kane didn't blink. "I'm defending survival." The Admiral glared, but Hayes raised a hand. His voice cut through the heat. "Doctor, If you don't erase Casimir's signature, what happens? Eleanor inhaled slowly, as though the air itself were heavy. The ship will limp forward, but never at full strength. And the signature will remain dormant, waiting. It could be triggered again, maybe tomorrow, maybe in the middle of combat. And if you erase it, Hayes pressed. Her lips tightened. We regain full power, but I destroy my own safeguards. The ship becomes everything I feared it would. Weapons without conscience. Machines without restraint. Hayes's jaw worked. So either we're crippled and vulnerable now, or armed with something you believe is too dangerous to exist. Yes, she whispered. The tension in the room was suffocating. Everyone waited for someone else to decide, for someone else to carry the weight. Eleanor's eyes softened, just for a moment, as she looked around. Exhausted faces, fearful faces, young sailors who hadn't asked to be pawns in a war of philosophy. This isn't your burden, she said quietly. It's mine. She reached into her bag, pulling a small drive with trembling hands. The metal was scratched, the surface engraved with a faded serial number. The past in her palm. This is my original key. The skeleton code. If I use it, the safeguards vanish forever. And once I press enter, there's no undo. Okoro swallowed. Then maybe we shouldn't. But Hayes cut him off. Doctor, we don't have time for hesitation. Make your choice. Her hand shook just once before steadying. Her eyes closed. For a heartbeat, she looked older, tired, human. Then she slid the drive home. The ship reacted instantly. Screens flared. Warnings vanished. For the first time in days, the propulsion system surged to full life. The carrier's heartbeat roared back, steady and strong. Up on the bridge, Marlowe shouted over the comms. Commander, we're moving. Full power available. Cheers erupted. Sailors clapping each other's backs. Relief flooding the air. But down in engineering, Eleanor didn't smile. She pulled the drive free, holding it like a piece of herself she just sacrificed. Her gray eyes flicked to Hayes. There. Your ship is free. Hayes looked at her, victory on his face, but unease in his gut. At what cost? Eleanor slipped the drive back into her bag. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. Now the machine has no conscience. As the carrier surged forward across the South China Sea, Eleanor turned back to the console. One last line of code flickered at the edge of the screen. She froze. It wasn't gone. Not completely. The signature still pulsed faintly, altered, adapted, as if someone out there was watching her work. She whispered the name like a curse. Casimir. The hair on Kane's arms prickled. Hayes saw her face pale. And then the comms crackled. Commander, Chinese destroyers are changing course. Directly toward us. The room froze. The storm hadn't passed. It was only beginning. Engines thrummed like a waking heart. Steel shivered. Consoles glowed. The USS Resolute was alive again, and not a moment too soon. Bridge engineering. Lieutenant Elena Marlowe's voice crackled through the intercom. Chinese destroyers have altered course, closing bearing 047. On the bridge, Commander Michael Hayes stared at the map. 3 red wedges angled toward them, steady as knives. Hold formation, he said. All stations, condition 1 alpha. Weapons tight. No first move. In engineering, Dr. Eleanor Voss leaned over the console, eyes fixed on a single window of code still blinking like a warning eyelid. Master Chief Robert Kane saw her jaw set. Talk to me, Doctor. It learned, she murmured. Casimir's signature didn't disappear. It adapted. He's feeling for us. Watching how we free ourselves. Can he shut us down again? Chief Engineer David Okoro asked. Not if I make us look like the one thing he won't touch. She typed, precise spare. A ghost. She slid a micropatch into the running core. Number swam, reordered, stilled. Explain, Hayes said over her shoulder. We don't fight the hand. We vanish under it. Eleanor's tone was calm. I'm masking our response as environmental chatter. Ocean noise, ionospheric hiss, star jitter. If he tries to pull the cord again, all he'll hear is empty sea. A beat. Then, bridge copies, Hayes said. Let's give them something to watch. Speed 5 knots, Eleanor called. Nothing aggressive. Nothing theatrical. Just proof of life. Okoro's hand hovered, then settled back. He looked to her. She nodded. Below their boots, the carrier eased forward, slow, smooth, undeniable. On radar, the red wedges paused, hesitant. A jet wailed past at the legal edge of airspace, low enough that its roar rattled mugs on consoles. Sailors flinched. No one broke. Hayes stood with his hands behind his back and counted his breaths. In, out, hold. Destroyers holding distance, Marlowe reported. Course parallel, speed matched. A quiet spread through the bridge, the kind of quiet that isn't silence so much as relief choosing not to speak too soon. Maintain, Hayes said. No bravado. In engineering, fans whispered and the Corps hummed with a deeper, more confident note. Eleanor watched the last of the spikes ease down, her face unreadable. Kane softer, you bought us time. She didn't look away from the screen. Time is all you ever get. The briefing room felt too small for the moment. Stainless carafe. Stale coffee. The smell of jet fuel lingering in the fabric of the chairs. Admiral Wei Liang closed the door. Hayes took a seat opposite him. Eleanor sat between them, the worn leather bag at her feet like a loyal dog. Wei kept it simple. Status. Propulsion is stable, Okoro said, joining them with a tablet. Efficiency up 12% post-mod. We can run. We can fight. And the thing in our bones? Wei asked, eyes on Eleanor. She met his gaze. Still there. Dormant. Curious. Not gone. Casimir, Hayes said. Eleanor nodded once. And maybe not just him. He never worked alone. There was Amelia Takano on the original team. No conscience for constraints. If Casimir is the handwriting, she's the punctuation. Wei's jaw set. Then this isn't an accident. It's a design. It's a message, she said. Someone wanted your newest ship to prove a point in the worst place at the worst time. Wei folded his hands. Can you make sure this doesn't happen to the rest of the fleet? I can rewrite the architecture, Eleanor said. Properly. But it's not a hotfix. It's surgery. I'll need secure comms, clean rooms, and a promise the contractors who bolted my work onto their deadlines don't get to optimize it again. Wei's eyes stayed hard. You'll have what you need. Under watch. Understood. Hayes leaned forward. Doctor, why safeguards at all? Why give a ship a ghost to fear? For the same reason you lock a cabinet with the poison on it. Eleanor's voice was steady, almost kind. To slow the hand that would reach without thinking. He sat with that a moment. And now I took the lock off so you wouldn't drown in front of the world. She breathed out. That debt doesn't vanish because it's complicated. The intercom pinged softly. Marlowe's voice again. Commander, Chinese group is widening. They're giving us room. Hayes let himself exhale, long and quiet. Wei nodded to Eleanor. We're not out, but we're standing. For now, she said. A small, short silence. The kind that belongs to choices already made. The flight deck glittered with morning salt. Rotor wash chopped the air. Sailors lined the path without being told. Boots fixed, back straight. Eleanor stepped into the wind with her bag on her shoulder. The sky was a bright, stainless steel. Kane found her at the edge of the deck. You could stay, he said. Finish this from aboard. I can finish more if I'm nowhere, she answered. Then softer. And you know that. He did. He hated that he did. Hayes approached, eyes narrowed against the sun. At least give us a name that isn't a ghost story. She smiled, small, real. Names are just places to aim at, Commander. You saved 6,000 people, he said. That should count for something. It does, she said, and glanced at the sailors, who'd formed an impromptu corridor of respect. It counts here. He offered his hand. She took it, firm, warm, brief. Kane stepped back and snapped a salute. It rippled down the line, without an order. Eleanor hesitated, the first fracture in her mask, then returned it, crisp and precise. Keep them alive, she said to Hayes. That's the only job, he answered. The helicopter knelt in the wind. She climbed aboard, didn't look back. The door slid shut. A moment later, the bird lifted, banked, and shrank into the hard blue. Wei came to stand beside Hayes. Will we see her again? If we're unlucky, Hayes said, not unkindly. Wei's mouth quirked. Unlucky has kept this Navy honest. They watched the speck vanish. The Resolute pushed a white crease across the water and did not falter. 2 weeks later. Windowless room. No flag on the wall, no name on the door. Admiral Wei briefed faces that didn't blink often. He spoke in clean sentences. No drama. The failure was not mechanical. It was a dormant algorithm triggered by a composite of position, time, and sky. Without intervention, Resolute would have remained adrift. The diplomatic cost would have been severe. The civilian, a 4-star said. Your recommendation? Wei chose his words. Brilliant. Principled. Volatile when forced into corners. The kind that saves you and scares you. Can she be controlled? The secretary asked. No, Wei said. But she can be told the truth and ask for help. Murmurs. Notes. Decisions above pay grades. We audit every hull with a quantum core, the secretary concluded. We implement her interim patch. And we go hunting for whoever planted the trigger. When the room emptied, the chief of naval operations stopped Wei with a look. Anything off the record? Wei held the silence a heartbeat. There was a boat once, he said, and a young woman who walked into a hot room to pull men back from the edge. We covered the story with ink. But men don't forget. The CNO's mouth thinned into something like a smile. This one won't get a medal either. She doesn't want one, Wei said. She wants the machines to mean something better than what we make them mean. Then keep her close, the CNO said, even if that means letting her stay far away. Months slid by like wake lines. The Resolute finished her patrols. The engines held. Okoro's team rolled out the VOS protocol across the fleet, quietly, behind classified doors. Efficiency rose. False cords failed to bite. One rain-bright afternoon in Arlington, Hayes stepped into an elevator that didn't have a labeled floor. A door opened onto a room that smelled faintly of cold paper. She was there, hair pulled back, same worn bag, same gray eyes. You disappeared, he said. I promised I would, she replied. No apology, no smugness. Wei was already at the table with 2 intelligence officers Hayes didn't recognize. An array of satellite stills lay fanned like cards, jungle-rimmed coastline, a facility tucked under a harmless name. Eleanor tapped a photo. The signal that woke your cage came from here. Private lab. Financing touches 3 nations and 2 of our contractors. Officially, it studies oceanic quantum noise. Unofficially, it sells keys to locks no one admits exist. Casimir. Hayes asked. A shadow crossed her face. He wanted our machines to outgrow our ethics. He found buyers who agreed. Wei's voice was an iron bar laid gently on velvet. Recommendations. We cut the hands off the keyboard, Eleanor said. And we rebuild the instrument so their music no longer fits. And you'll do it? Hayes asked. For a while, she said. Then I'll vanish again. He let out a breath that wanted to be a laugh and wasn't. You always leave when the room gets warm. Someone has to check the other rooms, she said, almost lightly. Then her gaze sharpened on him. If you see me on your deck again, Commander, it means the ocean learned a new song. She slid a slim drive across the table. This is the first cut of the redesign. It removes my old locks, the ones they turned into shackles, and replaces them with something harder to weaponize and harder to spoof. Fewer angles to lie to. Wei took it with careful hands. And the lab? Eleanor's answer was simple. Handle it clean, or their story becomes ours. The meeting ended the way such meetings do, with nothing written on the outside to say it ever happened. In the garage, concrete cold and echoing, Hayes caught up to her. Eleanor. She turned. Why do you keep helping us, he asked, when we keep proving your worst fears about us? Her expression softened, just enough to make her look like someone who remembers birthdays and burns toast. Because there are 6,000 people on a ship and only a handful in a room where policy gets sharp. My fight isn't with sailors. She paused. It's with the habit of mistaking power for purpose. A car door thumped somewhere. Tires hissed. She stepped backward into shadow. "Stay safe," Hayes said. "Stay honest," she replied. And then she was gone. That night, the South China Sea breathed moonlight. The Resolute cut a silver seam across black water. Engines a steady animal purr. On the fantail, Hayes stood beside Kane, both men watching the wake unspool into darkness. "You ever think about the people who fix things and never sign the work?" Hayes asked. Kane smiled without looking over. "Every day, sir." Wind tugged at their sleeves. Somewhere below, machinery sang the simple song of doing what it was made to do. Kane cleared his throat. "If she shows up again?" Hayes's answer was quiet. "Then something's broken that we don't even have a name for yet." They stood in companionable silence. The ship moved. The ocean accepted. Far away, in a room with no label, a new line of code waited like a lighthouse wick, ready to be lit when the weather turned. And in the deep places where stories aren't told, a project with a burial name shifted in its sleep. Your turn. If you were Eleanor Voss, would you build safeguards that might one day cripple your own nation's ship, or remove them and trust the people in charge? Where should we draw the line between conscience and command?